froze the moment I read the text. It was a Tuesday night. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of leftover pasta and my laptop open to a spreadsheet I'd been updating for the past hour. Bills. My brother's bills mostly. Some of my parents'. I'd been doing this for almost 3 years at that point, keeping track of what I was covering so I could feel like I had some kind of control over it, even when everything felt like it was slipping. My phone buzzed. I thought it was my mom checking in. She did that sometimes, usually around dinner time, usually when she wanted to remind me about something she needed before I could think to bring it up myself. But it wasn't my mom. It was my brother. "Hey, we're back. Trip was amazing. Mom said you were asking about dates? We went last week. Sorry for the confusion, lobble." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the table and just sat there. Last week, I had paid for that trip. Every single part of it. The Airbnb in Asheville, the dinner reservations, the activity package at the outdoor rec center, the gas money I transferred to my dad because he said his card had a low limit and he didn't want to deal with the fee. I had paid for all of it, and I had been waiting for months to find out when we were actually going because every time I asked, someone had a reason it wasn't the right time to nail down dates. My manager had been writing me about taking PTO. I had more than 2 weeks banked. I'd been holding off because I kept telling myself, I'll take it when we do the family trip. I was waiting for them. They went without me. And my brother texted me about it like he was clarifying a scheduling mix-up. I didn't respond that night. I couldn't. I turned off my phone, I rinsed my bowl, and I went to bed at 8:30 in the evening, which is something I hadn't done since I was recovering from mono in college. I just needed to be somewhere quiet where I didn't have to process anything. I should back up, because if you're hearing this without context, you probably have a lot of questions. My name is Hazel. I'm 31. I work in healthcare administration at a mid-sized hospital network. Not glamorous, but steady. And the salary is decent enough that I was able to start actually saving after I paid off my student loans at 28. I'm not rich. I'm not even close to rich. But I'm responsible with money in a way that, somewhere along the way, my family decided meant I was the family's financial backstop. It started small, the way these things always do. My brother, I'll just call him my brother, is 3 years younger than me. He's charming in the way that certain people are charming, the kind where you're always a little bit unsure whether they actually care about you or whether they're just good at seeming like they do. We were close when we were kids. As adults, we see each other at holidays and family events, and the relationship is fine. Or I thought it was fine. Looking back, I'm not sure I was paying attention to what it actually was. My parents are both retired. My dad was a foreman at a manufacturing plant for 30 years. My mom worked part-time at a dental office until she had a back surgery 4 years ago that made it too hard to be on her feet. Their retirement income is enough to cover their mortgage and their basic bills, but not a lot of wiggle room. I understood that. I genuinely didn't mind helping out here and there. Here and there is where things get slippery. It started with the car repair. My dad's truck needed a new alternator, and they were about $400 short that month because they'd already paid their property tax. I transferred $400. Fine. I didn't think twice. Then it was my brother's electric bill when he and his girlfriend had an expensive month and got behind. $212. Fine. Then my mom needed a new prescription that her insurance didn't cover well, and the copay was steep. Fine. Then my brother lost his job, his third in 4 years, and my parents asked if I could help cover his rent for a couple of months while he got back on his feet. That was $975 a month. The couple of months became 8. I kept a spreadsheet. Not to hold it over them. I want to be clear about that. I kept it because I'm the kind of person who tracks things, who needs to see numbers in order to feel like I understand my own situation. When I added it up after about 2.5 years, the total was a little over $41,000. I sat with that number for a long time. I hadn't told anyone I was keeping track. I hadn't said no to anything. I had just kept transferring money, kept saying yes, kept telling myself that family helps family and that my situation was more stable than theirs, and that someday, when things evened out, it would balance itself. The trip to Asheville was supposed to be something different. My mom brought it up at Christmas. She said she'd always wanted to do a big family trip, something we'd all remember. And wasn't it a shame we'd never done one? I was in a good mood that night. I'd had a couple of glasses of wine. I said I'd cover it. I meant it as a gift, a real one. I looked up Airbnb listings and found a beautiful house in the mountains, 5 bedrooms, a deck with a view, close to the Blue Ridge Parkway. I found a package deal at an outdoor rec center that included kayaking and a guided hike. I made dinner reservations at a place that had been on my mom's list for years. I put the total on my card, $4,200, and I sent my dad $300 for gas because he asked, $40,500. And then the date-setting process began, and it never ended. Every time I asked about pinning down a week, there was a reason. My brother's girlfriend had a work thing. My dad had a doctor's appointment he might need to reschedule. My mom wasn't sure about the weather in the mountains in spring. I kept saying, okay, just tell me when and I'll request the PTO. My manager had already mentioned twice that I needed to use my time before it expired. Months passed. I stopped asking because asking had started to feel desperate. And then my brother texted me on a Tuesday night to tell me they'd gone last week. Just the 4 of them. My parents, my brother, his girlfriend, without me. Sorry for the confusion. Olbel. I called my mom the next morning. I had slept poorly and I had spent most of the night going over it in my head, trying to figure out the most charitable interpretation, and I couldn't find one. There wasn't one. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm the way it always is, the way that used to make me feel instantly at home and now sometimes makes me feel like I'm being managed. I told her I'd gotten my brother's text. I told her I hadn't known they were going without me. She said, honey, we thought you knew. I asked her how I could have known something no one told me. She got a little quiet. Then she said they had tried to reach me. I asked when. She couldn't give me a specific time. She said things had come together quickly and they thought it was fine since I'd already paid for everything and the reservation was in my name, technically, but they'd handled the check-in through the host. I had an Airbnb account. The booking was in my email. I had received the confirmation, the check-in instructions, the house manual. They had somehow gotten the door code. I can only assume my mom asked me for it at some point. And I gave it to her without thinking. And they had walked into a house I paid for and spent 4 days there without me. I stayed very calm on the phone. I surprised myself, honestly. I said, Mom, I need you to understand that I paid $4,500 for this trip, including Dad's gas, and I wasn't there. She said, well, sweetheart, you have a demanding job, and we knew you had PTO issues. I said, I would have found a way to go. I have been waiting for a date for 5 months. She said she was sorry I felt left out. She said family trips are complicated. That phrase, sorry you feel left out, has always made me want to put my head through a wall. It takes something real and makes it into a perception problem. It suggests the issue is my feelings, not the thing that caused my feelings. I recognized it for what it was. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just said I needed some time to think, and I hung up. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my dad. My dad is not the one who usually calls about money. That's my mom's territory. When my dad calls, it's usually to talk about sports or to ask if I know anything about a specific household repair. So I picked up expecting neither of those things because I knew what was coming. He asked how I was doing. We talked for about 90 seconds about nothing. Then he said, hey, I wanted to ask. The mortgage payment is coming up, and they'd had an unexpected expense with the AC unit, and was there any chance I could help cover the gap? About $1,100. I sat with the phone against my ear, and I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about $41,000. I thought about an Airbnb house in the mountains with a view I never saw. I thought about my brother's text. Sorry for the confusion, Lowell. I said, Dad, I've been thinking about something. Do you remember when Mom first talked about the family trip? At Christmas? He said yes. I said, I paid for that trip because I wanted us all to be there together. I paid $4,500 and I wasn't there. I'm trying to understand how that happened, and I'm having a hard time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said things had come together and they thought it would be okay. I said, I've been helping out for a long time. I want to keep having a relationship with you, and I want to keep being part of this family. But I'm not in a position right now to cover the mortgage gap. He said, Hazel, we're your parents. I said, I know, and I love you. But I wasn't at that trip. He said he'd see what they could figure out. His voice was different, cooler. We hung up, and I sat on my couch for a long time in the quiet of my apartment. I want to tell you what happened over the next few weeks, but first I need to explain what I did the morning after that phone call with my dad. I went through every recurring transfer on my accounts. I had 4 automatic payments set up for family members, my brother's renter's insurance, which I had set up when he moved into his current apartment and somehow never turned off. A monthly transfer to my parents that I'd started during the AC issue 2 summers ago and had just kept running. A small Venmo recurring payment to my mom for her phone upgrade that was supposed to be a loan and had been going for 14 months. And the gas card I kept loaded for my brother. I paused all of them. Just paused, not deleted. I wanted to think before I did anything permanent. Then I called my best friend from college. She listened to the whole thing, the trip, the text, the phone call with my dad, without interrupting, which is one of the reasons she's been my best friend for 11 years. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, You know what's wild to me? They couldn't give you a date for 5 months. But when you weren't available to chase them down anymore, suddenly the trip came together in like a week. I had not thought about it from that angle. I turned it over in my mind and it fit perfectly, and I hated that it fit perfectly, and I hated that it fit perfectly. She also said something else that I've thought about a lot since then. She said, You've been funding their life because you thought it was what a good daughter does. But good daughters aren't ATMs. And somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing the difference. She was right. I knew she was right. I just needed someone outside of the situation to say it plainly. Over the next 2 weeks, my mom called 4 times. Each call followed roughly the same pattern. Some warmth at the beginning, then a pivot to either the mortgage gap or some variation of, I hope you're not upset about the trip, and then at some point an implication that I was being distant, which was new, and that my attitude was worrying her. My attitude. I was polite in every call. I said I was doing well. I said I was processing some things. I did not commit to any transfers. The 5th call was different. My brother called instead of my mom, which was unusual. He said he'd heard I was going to do something and he just wanted to check in. I said I appreciated that. Then he said, Hey, while I have you, I know mom and dad have been dealing with the mortgage thing and it's putting a lot of stress on everyone, so if you could help out, it would really take the pressure off. I said, I've had some expenses recently. You know, I paid for a trip to Asheville back in April. There was a pause. He said, Yeah, we really appreciated that. I said, I'm sure. But I'm tightening up my budget for a while. He said, Come on, it's mom and dad. I said, I know who they are. He got a little sharp after that. Said I was being selfish. Said that I had a good job and didn't have a family to support the way they did. He and his girlfriend had just moved in together. Apparently this was equivalent to having dependents, and that it was strange that I was suddenly being difficult when the family needed me. Difficult. I thought about every transfer. Yes. 5 months of waiting for a trip date, 4 days in a mountain house I paid for that I never saw. I said, You know what I think about sometimes? When you texted me that you were back from Asheville, you said, Sorry for the confusion. I've been thinking about whether that's really what you thought it was. A confusion. He didn't say anything. I said, I'm not going to be difficult. I'm just not available the way I used to be. I hung up. Okay, I have to be honest here because I want you to understand the full picture, not just the version that makes me sound completely composed and righteous the whole time. The next few weeks were hard. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with this kind of situation. It's not like losing someone exactly, but it's a loss of something you thought was real, the version of my family I had in my head, where I was choosing to help because we all chose each other, where the love was mutual even if the financial circumstances weren't. I had to let that version go. And that hurt more than the money. I talked to a therapist. I'd seen one briefly in my late 20s and I called her up again. One of the first things she said was, "Tell me what you got out of being the one who gave." And I had to sit with that for a while because the honest answer was complicated. I got to feel needed. I got to feel like I was the responsible one, the capable one. I got to believe that if I was useful enough, that was the same as being loved. That's the part that took the longest to untangle. Here's what happened a few months later. My parents did figure out their mortgage gap. I never found out how, and I didn't ask. My brother and his girlfriend are still together. My mom sends me texts every few days, mostly life updates and pictures of their dog. The relationship is quieter now, less frequent. There's a distance that I think we've both tacitly agreed to not address directly. I took a week off work in September. I went to a state park in Colorado that I'd had bookmarked for 2 years. I hiked by myself, which I was nervous about and turned out to love. I sat on a summit at about 11,000 feet and looked out at a view I had paid for with PTO. I had earned. And I did not feel guilty about any of it. But before that, there was one more conversation. About 6 weeks after the Asheville thing, my mom and I had a real talk. Not a phone call where we talked around things, but an actual conversation. She drove to see me. She doesn't usually do that. And we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd been sitting when I got my brother's text. She said she knew things had changed. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking too. And she said something that I didn't expect. She said, "I think I let it go on too long. I should have said something when we went without you. I should have pushed back on how the trip got organized. I'm sorry. It wasn't a full accounting of everything. It didn't address the money or the years of transfers or the way I had been treated like a resource. But it was something. My mom has never been good at apologies, and I knew how much that one cost her. I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I meant it." I also said something that I'd been sitting with for a long time. I said, "I love you, but I need you to understand that I'm not able to be the family's financial safety net anymore. Not because I don't care, but because it was costing me more than money, and I didn't know how to say no before." She looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "I think we leaned on you more than we should have." That was enough. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep the door open. Here's what I want to say to you if you're listening to this and any part of it sounds familiar. There's a script that a lot of families run, especially when there's one person in the family who's financially stable and everyone else isn't. The script says, "You have more, so you give more, and giving is what makes you a good daughter or son or sibling." The script doesn't mention what happens to the person who gives. The script doesn't have a chapter about what it costs to keep saying yes when yes is slowly hollowing you out. I followed that script for 3 years. $41,000. Countless phone calls where I said yes before the ask was even fully out of someone's mouth. The Asheville trip was the thing that broke it, which is strange because it wasn't even the biggest financial thing. But it was the clearest. It was the moment where I couldn't tell myself a story about how this was mutual, how we all helped each other, how things would balance out. There was a house in the mountains and I paid for it and I was not there. That was the truth in a shape I finally couldn't look away from. I'm not telling you to cut off your family. I'm not telling you what to do at all, honestly. I'm just telling you what happened to me. What I know now is this. You can love people and also have limits with them. Those two things can coexist. The limits aren't a betrayal of the love. Sometimes they're the only thing that makes the love sustainable. I spent a long time thinking that keeping score meant I was a selfish person. But there's a difference between keeping score and knowing your own worth. There's a difference between a gift and a transfer someone is waiting on. I don't keep the family spreadsheet anymore. I deleted it last winter on a Sunday morning when I was feeling clear-headed and ready. I made coffee and I deleted the file and I sat by the window and watched it snow a little. Just a few flakes, the first of the season. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel righteous. I just felt like a person who finally lived in her own life. That was enough. I thought a lot about why it took me so long to see what was happening. Not the individual moments. I noticed those, I just explained them away. What I mean is the pattern, the shape of it, the way $41,000 can disappear from your life quietly, in small increments, each one reasonable enough on its own that you never stop to look at the total. The truth is, I was getting something out of it too. That's the part I had to be honest with myself about. When you're the capable one, the stable one, the one people call when things go wrong, there's a version of yourself you get to be. Needed. Competent. Indispensable. I liked that version. I had built an identity around her. And somewhere along the way, I confused being useful with being loved. That's not a character flaw. It's a very human thing. But it has consequences, and those consequences tend to compound quietly until something, a text, a missed trip, a mountain house you paid for that you never saw, makes the whole picture visible at once. When my brother texted me sorry for the confusion, level E, I don't think he was being cruel. I think he genuinely didn't register what had happened as something that required a real apology. And that's almost worse, because it means the dynamic had become so normal to everyone else that my absence from a trip I funded didn't feel like an absence at all. I had made myself so consistently available, so reliably yes, that my actual presence had stopped mattering. I was just the account the trip was charged to. The choices I made after that, pausing the transfers, telling my dad I couldn't cover the mortgage gap, telling my brother I wasn't available the way I used to be, those weren't acts of anger. They were acts of clarity. There's a difference. Anger wants to punish someone. Clarity just wants to stop participating in something that isn't working. What I understand now, and what I wish I'd understood earlier, is that generosity without limits isn't generosity. It's self-erasure dressed up as kindness. Real generosity comes from a place of choice. You give because you want to, because you have enough, because it means something to both people. The moment it becomes expected, the moment someone stops saying thank you and starts saying, "Why haven't you yet?" it's no longer a gift. It's an obligation you agreed to without knowing you were agreeing. Lena told me once, when I was in the middle of all of it, that I wasn't being selfish by stopping. She said the people who call you selfish for having limits are usually the ones who benefited most from you not having any. I wrote that down. I still think about it. I took that trip to Colorado in September. I sat on a summit at 11,000 feet and I looked out at the kind of view that makes you feel very small and also, strangely, very free. I had earned that week. Every hour of PTO, every dollar of the flight, every mile of the hike. It was mine in a way that nothing I'd funded for anyone else had ever been mine. That feeling. Not triumph, not revenge, just simple ownership of your own life, is what I'd been spending $41,000 trying to buy from people who were never going to sell it to me. You can't purchase belonging from people who've already decided you're useful but not essential. What you can do is stop paying the bill, walk out into your own life, and discover that it was always there waiting for you.